In 2010, Bruno Mars came out with this song. When I see your face, there's not a thing that I would change, 'cause you're amazing just the way you are. 2 years later, he came out with this song. I hope he buys you flowers and holds your hand, gives you all his hours when he has the chance, takes you to every party, 'cause I remember how much you love to dance. Do all the things I should have done when I was your man. This is neurotic commitment. Within 2 years, he goes from proclaiming his great love for this woman, how beautiful she is and how amazing she is, but his words don't match up with what he is saying. And we as human beings have a terrible time being committed to things that are important or things that we say, yes, we want to do that, because sometimes we want to leave a little bit of room for unless something better comes along. It's like that little clause at the end of the contract, unless something better comes along. And see, this is what we see happens all throughout our lives as Christians. We are neurotically committed to Christ. We know all the right things to say. We know all the right things to do to look really good to everybody else. But when it comes down to it, we often fall short. And it's not necessarily the fact that we don't believe what we say, because I think we actually do believe what we say. What it comes down to is we're neurotic. We think when it comes down to it, we'll do such and such, but in reality, we've deceived ourselves. And this is really no surprise. It shouldn't really come as a surprise. As you look throughout the entire Old Testament, you see the nation of Israel proclaim their dedication to God over and over and over, only to fall away. God says, don't make an idol. And they immediately make an idol, a God they can control. And then all throughout the Old Testament, they proclaim their love for God, and then they're sent into exile because they've fallen away from God and start worshiping other things. And then Jesus comes onto the scene, and he proclaims that he wants all of your life. At the beginning of Jesus' ministry, you have to remember that he was healing people. It was basically this come and see. He heals the blind. He heals the paraplegics. He heals the people with demons. He casts out demons. And then people are coming to him because they see him as a unique individual among them. But as Jesus' ministry goes on, and they identify him as the potential Messiah, Jesus starts ratcheting up the commitment level and the intensity of his teachings. So what I want to invite you to do, we're going to join Jesus in Luke 14, verses 25 through 26. And we're going to see where one of many of his teachings that were difficult for his contemporaries to hear are taught. So we're in Luke 14, verses 25 and 26. Y'all there? Not yet. He's got to find it on his cell phone. Now great crowds were traveling with him, Jesus. So he turned to them and said, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. But wait a minute, Jesus. You've been healing the dead, healing the lame, when you were doing good things for us, that was all cool. Now it's going to start costing us something, and what we see is people say, I'm committed, but not that much. So people start leaving him in droves. Instead of the free handouts at the beginning of his ministry, people are like, well, I'm not interested in giving my life to you. So you imagine that you're in this crowd and you're thinking, well, maybe that's just for the people that really want to be close to Jesus. They want to go to the next level, right? No, Jesus says, anyone who comes to me must do these things. It's not like he was just talking to the 12 disciples or somebody really close to him. He's saying, if you're going to follow me as a Christian, here's the level that you have to reach. So what we see is that the cost becomes high for everyone. Basically, Jesus is saying, I have to be number one in your life. That's what Jesus wants. And this makes sense, right? I mean, if you're a follower of Jesus, you've become part of the bride of Christ. So ladies, let me ask you this. If your husbands came home and said, baby, I've been 95% faithful to you this year, how do you think you're going to react to that? Right. You're not going to focus on that 95%. You're going to focus on that 5% of the time going, what were you doing? Right? And so Jesus is asking for the same commitment. He's saying, you are my bride. I expect you to be committed to me. Basically, it doesn't matter how high of a passing grade you give yourself. Jesus says, I want 100%. And Jesus is expecting you to reach that. So what it comes down to is that compared to your love for Jesus, all other things take second place. And these things may look like hate to other people. Let me tell you what Jesus is not saying in these verses. He is not saying, he's not giving you an excuse to divorce your wife. He's not giving you an excuse to beat your children. He's not giving you an excuse to be abusive towards anyone in your family. What Jesus is saying is that he must be number one, and everybody else who has influence on your life must be number two, because at some point in your life, Jesus is going to call you to do something that mommy and daddy, your husband or wife, your brother or sister are not going to want you to do. See, mommy and daddy might say, hey, you need to be an accountant, or you need to be a sports star because all of these things make lots of money. Or your wife might say, you really need to quit your job at the church and go work for the stock market, be a broker or something like that, where we can really feel secure. And then Jesus is saying, no, I need you to be a pastor or a missionary, or I simply need you to be available to volunteer at your local church or to teach a Sunday school class. If your job conflicts with that, guess what Jesus is expecting you to do? He wants you to give up that job to follow him. You see, we can either be followers of Jesus or we can be followers of others. We cannot be both. See, it was a Valentine's Day a couple of Sundays ago, and I bet many of you ladies got flowers from your husbands or boyfriends, fiancés, stalkers, whatever it might be. Now, Conrad, I'm just going to pick on you because you're on the front. I'm assuming, did you give Doris flowers on Valentine's Day? Oh, okay. Did anybody give flowers to their wife on Valentine's Day? Oh, good, Steve, thank you. Because I didn't either, so. I want you to imagine, Sharon, how would you feel if Steve came home, he knocks on the door, you open it up, and he has flowers, and you say, they're so beautiful. He says, don't mention it's Valentine's Day, it's my duty.
That's probably what happened.
Now, you would much rather know that those flowers are coming from a place of love, that Steve is pouring out love and expressing his love to you this way, right? So Jesus is not expecting us to say, yeah, Jesus, I'll follow you wherever you want to go, begrudgingly. Jesus is saying, I want you to follow me because you love me, and I want you to express it. So Jesus is not simply commanding you to follow him just begrudgingly. He's asking you to follow him because you love him. And now listen, it makes sense when you look at the entire biblical narrative. When you look at Genesis and God creates man and he has a special relationship, he's created this beautiful earth and he places man there on the sixth day and he says, all of this is yours. You are to have dominion over this. Listen up. I want to be in a relationship with you. Your creator wants to be in a relationship with you. I want to be number one in your life. And so it's no surprise that when Jesus comes on the scene, he says, hey, listen, I'm tired of you singing songs to other people and other things. I want you to come back and sing love songs to me. Because I need to be number one like it was in the beginning. So in order to follow Jesus, we need to reject the fallen order that the fall created and stop being persuaded by the ones around us and surrender our lives to God. So again, we're back to that choice. I can follow others or I can follow God. But I have a choice to make. I cannot follow both. And I want to take a look at what this looks like. Matthew 8, 21 through 22, if you'll turn there with me real quickly. Matthew 8, 21 and 22. A couple of people have come to Jesus wanting to be his disciple, but this one in particular is one that I want to look at. It says this in verse 21, Lord, another of his disciples said, first let me go bury my father. But Jesus told him, follow me and let the dead bury their own dead. Can you imagine the shock that was in that guy's heart when he says that? Like, wait a minute, Jesus, you're all about compassion and love and you're healing people. And now you want me to not do my obligation toward my family, not take care of my father if he hasn't died yet, or is on the way to dying, or if he's already died, I missed this period of mourning. You want me to just forget all of those religious obligations and follow you. Is that what you're saying to me? And Jesus is telling this man, yes, nothing can come between me and you. He said, well, why? Because the kingdom work is that important. Because Christ is relying on a 100% commitment. The only way that the message is going to be spread is if people are completely sold out to Jesus. So if we are going to love Christ and we are going to successfully follow him, we must count the cost because it is high. I also want you to go back, we're back over here on Luke 14. We've talked about hating our families, just loving Jesus more than our families, not an active hate. But Jesus says this in 14:22. Oops, no. 14:26, sorry. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, and listen to this, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Okay, Jesus is not telling you that you should go home and kill yourself. And he's not telling you that you should tell yourself how terrible you are. He's not saying that you should just despise your life and be like, oh, woe is me all the time. Jesus is saying, again, compared to him, our desires, our affections, our intentions, our dreams, our aspirations must take second place. See, Jesus wants his disciples to be willing to set aside those things and follow him. So you may have dreams of being a business owner, retiring early, being the best grandparent in the world, being the best father in the world, whatever it might be. But if Jesus calls you to go to Nepal, or Uganda, or China, or Chile, or Iran, or Nigeria, Jesus wants you to be ready to follow him. You see, this is the commitment that Jesus expects of those who follow him. And don't think for a moment that Jesus wouldn't call you to do these things. You see, there are people all over the world who give their lives to preaching the gospel to people that have not had the opportunity to hear it. And we call those people missionaries. They are totally surrendered to Christ. They show that everything is second place to following Jesus. And it doesn't simply stop with surrendering your plans to Jesus. At some point, your life could be called into account for Christ. So we must be ready to lose our lives before we are going to give up Jesus. One Sunday morning, a pastor was about to start his sermon when 3 masked gunmen entered the back of the church. They said, anyone not ready to die for Jesus better leave now, because we're going to execute all those who stay. As the church emptied out and a few remained, the masked gunmen locked the door, pulled off their masks, and revealed that it was 3 deacons from the church. The chairman of the deacons says, okay, pastor, now that we've gotten rid of those who aren't worshiping, you can continue with your sermon. Now, I don't think our deacons would be that bold. Darce might be that bold. And there are times that I've been in deacons meetings where I felt like I've been shot. But otherwise, we have to be ready to give up our lives. We have to be ready to give up our lives. And I don't want you to think that, like that would never happen. I mean, we see stories about people all over the country now being executed in church, in America, where you would never think something like that would ever happen. Forget being in a foreign country, it's starting here. So don't think that that wouldn't happen. And I want to show you why Jesus says that you must be ready to give your life, because it could come down to that. Look with me to Luke 22, verses 31 through 34. Luke 22, 31 through 34. Imagine for a moment, we're in the Lord's Supper, the Lord's Last Supper. Imagine that you're a fly on the wall, and you're observing everything. You get this very aerial view of the whole table. You see, Jesus is up front. He's with his closest companions, people that he's poured his life into for the last 3.5 years. He knows what's coming. He's going to the cross. And as he's sitting around the table, across the table from him sits a man that's about to betray him. And then sitting a couple of seats over is a man who has a neurotic commitment to him. And his name is Peter. And Jesus says this to Peter, Simon, Simon, look out. Satan has asked to sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. Lord, he told him, listen, Jesus, I'm ready to go both to prison and to death. And he says, I tell you, Peter, the rooster will not crow today until you deny me 3 times. So I want you to get that picture. This man has followed Jesus. I mean, Peter is like overly in love with Jesus, right? I mean, he was like, let's run ahead and do whatever it takes. And suddenly, he's faced with this. He's going, yeah, right, Jesus, you're wrong. You don't know me. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to do whatever it takes. And he says, but when the commitment gets real, you're not going to be ready. So look what happens here in Luke 22, 54 through 62. 54 through 62. They seized him, Jesus, and led him away and brought him into the high priest's house. Meanwhile, Peter was following at a distance. They lit a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together. And Peter sat among them. When a servant saw him sitting in the firelight and looked at him closely, she said, this man was with him too. But he denied it, woman, I don't know what you're talking about. After a little while, someone else saw him too and said, you are one of them too. And he says, man, I am not. About an hour later, another kept insisting, this man is certainly with him, since he was also a Galilean. But Peter said to him, man, I don't know what you're talking about. Immediately, while he was speaking, a rooster crowed. Then the Lord turned and looked at Peter. So Peter remembered the words of the Lord, how he said to him, before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. Imagine being Peter in that moment. I don't know him. I don't know what you're talking about. Never seen Jesus in my life. The rooster crows, and he looks at the man that he's just betrayed. And he knows that he did nothing to deserve that. You see, he wasn't ready to die for Christ. And we don't necessarily have to be faced with a decision of our lives, sometimes it just comes down to the decision of, hey, didn't I see you at Middle River on Sunday morning? No, I wasn't there. Aren't you one of those Christian people? No, not me. Because Christianity puts us in danger. And some of you might be thinking like, well, this is a really depressing message. Because if Peter couldn't hold it all together, then who in the world possibly can? And the answer is no one. Not one of us can stand up and follow Christ the way that he's commanded, to forsake everything and follow him. This is where the beauty of the cross comes in. You see, not one of us can live up to the expectations that God has placed upon us. Not one. We proved that in the garden when we couldn't follow one simple stinking rule. Don't eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. One rule. Well, of course, we're curious people and we want to see what happens. So one simple command and then death reigns. He says, you're going to die. Do you understand that? Well, we don't care. So, dead. Then God intervenes. He comes into the nation of Israel and he starts a redemption plan and he says, follow these laws. And they say, yeah, we're on board. No, well, they're not on board. They continue to fall and fall and fall. And then Jesus breaks on the scene and says, to follow me, you got to forsake everything, and we can't live up to that. But the difference between the commands that God gave in the garden and the commands in the law and Jesus is that there is grace offered in the commands of Christ. Look what happens in the rest of this. John 21. I know we're flipping around a lot, but I want you to take a look at John 21, verses 15 through 19. Because here we see a beautiful picture of Christ doing something that he did not have to do. John 21, verses 15 through 19. When they had eaten breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said to him, you know that I love you. Feed my lambs, he said to him. A second time he asked him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, he said to him, you know I love you. Shepherd my sheep. He asked him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was grieved because he had asked him a third time, do you love me? And he said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And he says, feed my sheep. I assure you, when you were young, you would tie your belt and walk wherever you wanted. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will tie you and carry you where you do not want to go. He said this to signify by what kind of death he would glorify God. And after this, he said, follow me. 3 times Peter denies Christ. 3 times. And then Christ offers this great grace after the resurrection. Says, Peter, you deny me 3 times. I restore you 3 times. And in fact, not only have I restored you, I still expect you to follow me. And by the way, you are going to die for me. You are going to die for me. So a lot of us are neurotic Christians. We sit in the pew thinking, it's all good. We talk a good game. We're around safe people. We can say, we know how to word our sentences so we sound super spiritual. But deep down inside, some of us know that's not who we are. Some of us know that we're not following Christ the way that he intended for us to. And the good news is that there's grace. It doesn't matter where you are, where you've been, how long you've not been following Jesus. Jesus still says, come to me. Come to me. I will give you grace. You see, Jesus called us to forsake everything. He didn't just give us a get out of hell free card. He expects us to follow him and to show others the light of salvation. So we may be called to pick up our families and move across the country to go to seminary or take a new job or quit our job so we have more time for ministry or to join a ministry team or whatever it might be. If Jesus is calling us to do it, we need to do it. And if we haven't done it, there's still time to repent. There's still time to turn and to say, Jesus, I will follow you and do what you've called me to do. You know, maybe today you've never committed to Christ. And he offers the same grace. He says, hey, you've rejected me so many times, but I can restore you. This is the grace that I have to offer. My grace is sufficient for you. So whether you've been resisting for years or whether you've been going, I'm a neurotic Christian. We know in our hearts when we're neurotic Christians. Now's the time to repent. Now's the time to come to Jesus and say, Jesus, I haven't made it. But I believe that you can give me the grace I require to restore me to you. There is enough grace for all of us. Let's pray.